My name is Rodrigues and I'm based at Newcastle University, and today I'll be presenting about a smartphone app to promote sun protection among holiday makers. So what do we know about skin cancer? We know that 4 out of 5 cases of skin cancer could be prevented by sun protective behaviors, like, for example, applying sunscreen, wearing protective clothes, putting on a hat, or wearing sunglasses. And we also know that intermittent sun exposure, like, for example, the one that we get on our 2-week holidays, and the history of sunburns are the major risk factors for melanoma. And melanoma is the most lethal form of cancer. So looking at the skin cancer incidence per year, we can see that actually the northern European countries, are the ones with the highest incidence of skin cancer. But looking a little bit more closely, we see that Ireland and the UK have also quite high incidence rates for skin cancer. And for example, in the UK, skin cancer is the 5th most common form of cancer, and in Ireland, skin cancer overall, taking non-melanoma and melanoma, is the most common form of cancer. So this seemed to be related to the skin type, so the type of skin that people have that are more sensitive to sun, but to other factors that I'll show in a bit. And last month, I've came across this news article that showed that Ireland is facing a skin cancer epidemic. So according to the Irish Cancer Society, the incidence of skin cancer will increase by 2/3 by 2014. So there seems to be a rise in the skin cancer, and they are suggesting that they need to update the cancer prevention strategy to make sure there is a clear action plan for skin cancer prevention. So the other aspect that seems to play a lot of an important role in skin cancer is the recreational sun exposure, so the type of exposure that we get during our holidays, and has been associated with melanoma prevalence. And also in Ireland, there is a similar trend. So last year, the cancer prevention manager also mentioned that they can already see a trend in the increase of skin cancer that seems to be related to sun-related holiday-related exposure. So again, there seems to be a need for an intervention in this area. And as an example, WHO says that the UK population gets about 30% of their annual exposure in just those 2-week holidays. So it's a very intense kind of sun exposure that people try to get most of it in those 2 weeks. Okay, so how do we go about and develop an intervention? So what kind of things do we need to take into consideration, and how would you know that it's working or not? So what I'll be talking today is the different steps that we conducted to develop an intervention to promote sun protection. So we used the MIC framework, and overall we focus mostly on the development of the intervention itself, and then on the feasibility testing. So I'll be talking about each of those steps briefly for the intervention development. I'll start with a systematic review. So as Jane was saying earlier, we need to, when developing interventions, we need to know what's the evidence, what do we already know. This is not the first study that is looking into skin cancer prevention, especially in tourist settings. So what can we learn from those studies? So we look into the efficacy of studies of interventions trying to promote sun protection in holiday settings. And when we start looking into those studies, we realize that actually very little is known about how to prevent skin cancer in holiday settings. So we had 23 studies with no evidence for the efficacy in reducing tanning or promoting protective clothing or seeking shade. But the meta-analysis did show a small effect on improving self-reported sun protective behaviors used as an index, and larger effect for self-report sun exposure and number of sunburns. But we were also interested on what kind of things, what kind of strategies seem to work better than others. So we conducted a moderator analysis, and we found out that providing information on how and why and providing resources were important strategies to be included in such interventions. So the same for prompting, stimulating supportive social support, and providing appearance-based information by using UV photos. So I'll show you what are UV photos. So it's a normal photo that is taken with a UV filter, and what we've seen was the studies that were actually more successful in motivating people to change were using this type of strategy that would help people to visualize the sun damage to their skin. So this is the normal picture, and then we get a picture with the UV filter. And here people can see the darker spots on the skin, and those spots indicate damage. So the more spots you have, or the bigger the spots, the greater is the sun damage to your skin. And most studies reported that people found this kind of strategy really, really helpful to motivate people, because they could see exactly what was happening that they couldn't before in a normal picture. So it motivated them to change. So after the systematic review, we thought it was also important to interview some holidaymakers to try and understand the perceptions that they had about sun protection when they are on holidays, and what kind of sun protective behaviors were they already implemented, and any barriers or facilitators. So we conducted interviews with 17 participants. They were mostly female. And what we found was that people were well informed about sun protection. They were highly motivated to use sun protection, and they perceived themselves as being well protected, that they were doing everything correctly. However, they were using ineffective sun protection methods. For example, sunscreen was the preferred method that all participants reported using. But we also conducted a small experiment during the interview, where we asked participants to apply sunscreen on their arm, and we measured before and after. And then we could have an objective measure of how much they were putting on. And they were using less than the recommended amount, despite the fact that a lot of them said, oh, I actually put on more than I usually do. So it was really far from the recommended amount. The other aspect was when we asked them about, so considering your skin type, which we assess with every participant, how long do you think you can be exposed to the sun with no sun protection? And most of them significantly overestimated how long they could be, some by hours. So it tends to be normally for skin type 1 and 2, which is the majority of the population, about 15 minutes, and some were saying 2 to 3 hours. The other aspect was that seeking shade was the least used method. When we look into the WHO recommended methods for sun protection, seeking shade is the first line of protection from the sun. Here was the least used, which is understandable because they were thinking about their holidays, which there were a lot of barriers to actually seek shade when they are abroad or when they don't know the context where they are. And finally, covering up was mostly used as a partial coverage. For example, they would just mention using a hat or sunglasses, and not, for example, putting on a T-shirt or shorts. And finally, the desire to reach an optimum balance between getting a tan and using sun protection to avoid sunburns was very much prevalent. So everyone was trying to get this balance right, where they definitely want to get a tan, but they also want to make sure that they don't get sunburn. However, the message seemed to be that our participants are still lacking some information or exactly what strategies they can implement to be sun safe, especially because they are really motivated to tan. They over-rely on sunscreen and don't apply as much as they should. But also the problem is this overestimation of how long they can actually be exposed to the sun before it becomes dangerous. So there seems to be a lot of interest to develop an intervention to help them to be sun safe when abroad. Okay, so the next step was to bring all this information together and develop the intervention. At this stage, we realized that we would need a geographically flexible kind of intervention, despite the fact that I always thought I could go with them to Hawaii on holidays. I couldn't, it wasn't feasible. So we needed something that would reach the people when they are abroad and when they actually need the information, not before they travel. So for this reason, and also talking with colleagues in computer science and dermatology, we realized that a mobile phone app would be the best method to deliver such messages. So in terms of the stages, we use initially the systematic review and the theory evidence to identify active ingredients. And then for the intervention design, we use not only the systematic review, but we also consulted with experts in the area of the dermatology, computer science, and vitamin D, which during the length of the project became a huge topic that we needed to also take into consideration in the app. Once we got an initial prototype, we conducted a user-centered study, and after this we refined the app itself. So now I'll focus on the user-centered study that we conducted. So we also had 17 participants, and here what we presented the participants with was a mock-up of the intervention, so they could go through all the menus, get all the information that they would normally in the app, and give us feedback on what they thought, how it worked, about the design and the aspect of the app, so we could integrate and refine it. So all participants were satisfied with the prototype and said that they would be happy to use it when they were on holidays. However, they also made some suggestions to improve it, such as customize the prompts. So we thought initially that if we send too many prompts to put on sunscreen, that it would be too intrusive, especially because people are on holidays, and we really didn't want to be too much of an annoyance during such an enjoyable period. So we had only 2 prompts during the day. And actually the feedback was that they wanted more prompts, and they wanted to be able to customize to when they want the prompts, or many, in terms, for example, of the intensity every 30 minutes, every hour. So we had to also change that. We also used NHS videos for the general information about skin cancer. And here they said that they would like the videos to be shorter so they could get the information about a specific topic, watch it for a few seconds, and then go back to a normal activity. And finally, they also said that the skin cancer information and the UV photos that we were showing they were initially the first thing that you would see as you opened the app, and the feedback was to actually change this and put it in a different menu where people would have to really be interested in looking into the information and have some warning about what they were going to see. We didn't use any of those dramatic pictures, but still is a topic that they didn't want to be the first thing they would see when they open the app when they are on holidays. Okay, so this is the final version of the app. It has four main menus. So the first one, My Skin, is the skin assessment menu, where people will go through a few questions to check what skin type they are, and they get some feedback based on their skin type. How to be sun smart is all the information and the videos about skin cancer, but also the videos about how to put on sunscreen properly and how to protect children from the sun, for example. The third menu is the sun safety quiz. That looks something like this. We tried to bring a lot of the studies that we had in our systematic review had what they call interactive activities, and we tried to bring this as well into the app, so they had something to do. They would also give them some information. So they would get some statements like this, then answer true or false, and get some feedback. We tried to make this as short as possible, but if people wanted further information, there was always the option that they could click and get more information about the topic. For example, vitamin D was one of those that we had a section with resources if people wanted to read further on the topic. And our final menu is the Sun Alert Service. And this is the main screen. So in this menu, participants would get information, would get the reminder, the prompt to put on sunscreen. So it works with the GPS, and it would detect whether they are outdoors or indoors. And if they are outdoors, they would send the prompt. If not, it will just sit quietly, and there was no need to send any prompts because they weren't exposed. And then once the participant moves outdoors, they start counting how many minutes they've been outdoors, and they can also, for example, record what they are currently using in terms of sun protection. And after 2 hours, they would get another prompt that would say how long they've been out, and that they probably should come indoors, but also some strategies about what they could do. So our initial prompts only sent a prompt to say go indoors or you've been too long in the sun. But after the user engagement study, the feedback that we got was that instead of just saying not to do something, it would be important to give participants some suggestions of what could they do instead. And so we tried to create a backlog of different things that they could do on holidays that would match every person's preference. Okay, so our final stage was to use this version of the app and test in the pilot study, and try to understand how it worked and whether it was feasible to actually use it on holidays. So we needed people to go abroad, use it, and give us feedback on how it worked. So who participated in the study? So we had holidaymakers traveling up to 2 weeks, more than 18 years old, and they had to own an Android mobile phone. In terms of the trial procedures, once we assessed the eligibility and people were happy to participate, we'd done all the baseline assessment at that point, which included questionnaires, but also a skin swab that would measure mitochondrial DNA damage. So it's the kind of sun-induced damage done to the skin. And we collected those skin swabs on the bridge of the nose and on the arm to get both exposed and non-exposed areas. And we also gave all participants sunscreen, and some participants had sunscreen bottles with the sensors. So this is a accelerometer that would measure movement of the bottle, so then we could detect every time they use not just the quantity but also the movement itself of picking up the bottle and taking some of the sunscreen. And then we repeat all of these measures again when they came back from holidays. As you can see, we allocated people to sunscreen SPF 15 and sunscreen SPF 30, and this is due to the fact that in the UK there seems to be some confusion about what's the recommended SPF for sunscreen. So some agencies advocate for SPF 15 and others for SPF 30. So we thought we would bring this into the study as well and get the feedback from the participants about those two. Okay, so we had 42 participants. Again, we had more female than male, and people were traveling mostly to places like Spain and France, and the duration was mostly 14 days abroad. Okay, so in terms of the acceptability and feasibility, the two main problems for recruitment were the fact that we only included Android mobile phones, and we had a lot of people approaching us that were iPhone users, and unfortunately our app wasn't available for iPhone, so we couldn't include them. Another problem was the willingness to be randomized to SPF 15 and 30, so we had concerns both ways, people that wanted a lower SPF and people that wanted a higher SPF. Once they accepted the trial and accepted to be randomized, the allocation to SPF was still a problem, so they were still unhappy with the SPF they were given, and after participant number 16 we had to change our trial procedures and we had to introduce a preference option, so they would get still randomized, but if they were unhappy they were given the option to change or to take a bottle of each. So they had the option, and we would register, keep a note of their preference. In terms of the app itself, they were all satisfied with the app, but I guess a little bit related to what Jane was saying in terms of the personalization of interventions, this was really key as feedback. So people are interested in getting information or feedback that it's really tailored to them, to what they like doing or to their specific skin type, and that wasn't the case with the app. So the app wasn't able to learn from what they were doing, from the behaviors they were already registering or saying they were doing, and adapt the kind of alerts and the feedback that was giving. So they wanted a system that was able to learn. They wanted also their preference, for example, in terms of suggestions that we're giving for the prompts, and their personal risk to be taken into consideration. So how long till I get sunburned, or how many minutes can I actually be outside? And one of the reasons that we didn't include this is there's a lot of debate about the sunburn risk and how you measure it, and a lot of factors influence this. And we didn't want to say to participants that it's actually 13 minutes only. We didn't want to give them a specific time, but maybe there's an option to not be as specific as that, but still provide relevant and tailored feedback and information to participants that it's personalized to their risk level. So I think the next step in the app would be really to refine the sun alert menu and make sure that it's more tailored, that it's able to learn from people's preference and see if it works again and get more feedback for the next version. So in summary, UV photos seem to be an effective strategy to promote sun protection. So being able to visualize the damage that is already done is a powerful way to change behavior. Public health message should emphasize the appearance-based effect on overexposure, and also you should incorporate the how would they implement sunscreen, but also how would they pick the best shade, how would they pick the protective clothing that they are using. So a little bit more details in terms of this specific methods. And finally, the mHealth app seems to be a feasible way of helping people to be sun smart, and we hope we can refine this in the future. Thank you so much.